What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. And we're here this week for another Aether Revolt story. This one is called Breakthrough. Like Queen, like the Queen song. I will say, as our quick intro before we start, go and read this story. It takes some time. Fair warning, it takes some time, but it doesn't matter. Go read the story. Just go do it. Just stop listening to me telling you to go do it. If you haven't done it, go do it. And then come back here and enjoy, hopefully, enjoy our review of it. But we are not going to do it justice. There is a lot to this story, a lot of elements to this story, a lot of nuance to this story, and we're probably not even going to be able to cover all of it ourselves, but we're, of course, going to try to hit the major points and the things that stood out to us. But go read it, then come back here.
Please do.
It's worth your time. It's not.
It is.
It's not anything more than you will enjoy it because it was damn good. And there were, I believe, 2 new pieces of art in this one. There were many pieces of art, but I believe 2 of them were new, whereas the rest were from other cards from Kaladesh. So for those of you that are still here, this story was fantastic. You guys know that if you've read the story. I don't have to tell you that part of it. But we can go a little bit more in depth. First of all, we've talked about her before, in my opinion, in always positive ways. Maybe some people disagree. This story was written by the one and only Kimberly Kreines. We love her on this channel. Hopefully you guys love her as well if you have read her stories because they're amazing. What I find very interesting is that this was the second story from the Kaladesh block of stories that involved Rashmi. It involved Rashmi, stories being told from Rashmi's point of view. And it's the second story being told from Rashmi's point of view that was being written by Kimberly Kreines, which I think is awesome. I think that works really nicely, and it's a nice way of keeping continuity in the same writer between stories.
Right.
It's not a luxury that the Magic Story team has with a character like Gideon or Liliana or Jace or even technically Saheeli Rai or Dovin Baan, because now technically we've only seen Dovin twice, so it's a possibility, but with Saheeli we've seen her very frequently, and so you almost have to have her being written by many different people and her voice being heard from many different people's perspectives or writers' perspectives. This was an opportunity for us to hear Rashmi from Kimberly Kreines' mind only. Now, I say only. I am not certain because I have no insider information, but these stories are collective in terms of they discuss where the stories are going and where they're coming. So Rashmi's background and feelings and etc. are still going to be discussed among all the members of the story team, but Kimberly is the one who has the final say. She's the one who writes those words down and submits it to all of us. That's why she has the byline on this story. Which, Kimberly, as always, if you're watching this, fantastic job. It was amazing. I absolutely loved it. There were a lot of meaty parts to this story. Nothing felt thin to me. There was always, every time I was reading something, there was always something running through my mind of, okay, this is going to happen next. Okay, what about this? And Rashmi could do this to get out of this situation. There was never a point where I was reading it and I was like, okay, when's something exciting going to happen? It was always there. One thing that I'll point out that Amy and I have talked about quite often is that Rashmi is now falling into, or has now joined the ranks of some very prominent characters in the Magic story, all female, at least that we've seen so far, of supporting non-Planeswalker female characters who have had an extra-planar experience during their story. We got it first, from what I can remember, with Drana in the Battle for Zendikar story, where she drank in Eldrazi. We had General Tazri from Oath of the Gatewatch, where she was experiencing being warped. Yes, I love General Tazri, but she was being warped by Kozilek. And we had, who am I missing? There was somebody who I'm not going to remember from Shadows over Innistrad, and now I feel bad about it. Darn it. I'm not going to have it. It exists.
Leave it in
I
the
promise.
comments, guys.
Leave it in the comments. Plus, we've talked about it in other jars, so hopefully if you've watched our whole series, you've seen us talk about it before. But it seems to be, and whether this is intentional or not, it is a pattern that we have noticed in that it is a female non-planeswalker supporter character who is locked to a plane. I'm sorry, not technically not. Nahiri is who I was thinking of from within the Hell Vault. So, sorry, still all female, but not necessarily all non-planeswalker. But it is, and for Rashmi this time, very abbreviated. With all of the other ones, there were a lot more description. That's not a critique or me saying that that's a bad thing, just an observance in that all the other times, like for Drana, that was like the entire story, was her kind of experiencing drawing in the essence of the Eldrazi and almost being taken over by the Eldrazi, but having its memories and feelings. And and then same thing with General Tazri, that she experienced millennia of life and realized the kind of the purposelessness of a day or a minute, because when you've lived millions of years, a minute or a second or a day is nothing, because it's like a nanosecond to you and I, where we don't think anything of 1 second to the next because it's nothing in comparison to our whole lives.
I'm still Team Drana.
Drana was pretty awesome. I'm General Tazri, so we're still going along with that theme. And like I said, I mean, Nahiri had the same thing in the Hell Vault, where she originally was locked away on Zendikar for so long, just in a little bubble, watching over the Eldrazi, and then she was locked in the Hell Vault for a long time, but she didn't know how long, and it was kind of a void, so she had no concept. So all of that combined, I like it. It's a pattern that we have noticed. It's a pattern that...
And it's a great thing. It's a good way for wizards to give women more power in these stories, just like they wanted to, just to increase their inclusion and diversity, as well as just to make it more realistic, make it feel more like real life. In real life, there are women who fight and make a huge difference and do lots of great things in the world, and this is trying to mirror that in an effective way.
And I love it. I love being able to see that. I think that it's a lot of fun for me to notice that thread, because it's seemingly nothing, right? Like, we're going from plane to plane to plane, and Drana and General Tazri were on the same plane, and they knew each other because they fought alongside one another, but Drana and General Tazri had no connection to Nahiri. Technically, they were on the same plane at some point at Zendikar, but they didn't necessarily have any interactions with one another. Rashmi has no connection to them, but it's...
The connection is they're all part of the bigger whole that is the story of Magic. And not having a relationship at this point in time doesn't mean they can't go on to have relationships later on. Yeah, and it's this is Rashmi realizing the existence of the multiverse. This is Rashmi kind of just touching the multiverse. And I'm sure, because I think that Kimberly, again, did a great job in her writing, I'm sure that there were Easter eggs in the descriptions that were given of the worlds that she was seeing that I completely missed. But there were a couple of moments here or there where Amy and I were like, oh, she's on Zendikar now, because there is a floating diamond, she's in the jungle and there's a floating diamond-shaped object or rock or whatever that she doesn't understand. Well, guess what that is? It's a hedron. So that's fascinating in that you can pick up on those little things, and it's a nice moment of, oh, cool, I know what they're talking about. Those moments always feel good, and it's nice to see that ingrained in the story. And I will say, that was all her.
Because I was so into the story. I was like, a diamond-shaped thing? Could it be the Hell Vault that's suspended? And then Amy was like, oh, it's a hedron. I was like, oh, of course. I'm a dummy. So Amy got it and I didn't, so congrats. But there was that. This story had a lot more to it than just that.
Yeah, I mean, this story was crazy. There was a lot of stuff in there.
It ended...
Even though there wasn't really, like, there weren't a lot of characters or a lot of main characters.
There didn't need to be.
There didn't need to be. There was a lot in there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, name drops, we've been talking about that a lot. My tool was the only name drop who then didn't appear in the story at any point. But we find out from Saheeli that he is safe, despite the fact that my tool was talked about from the beginning. And I have to say to Kimberly, if you're watching, you got me, because when I was reading the story, Rashmi talked about her assistant, like the workshop assistant that was there with her, the automaton in the beginning, and she talked about, you know, the fact that automaton had no insight, it had no thought to it, and my first thought was, oh, what was her assistant's name? And so I went back and I went into the archive and I went to A Time for Innovation, which was the first story where we saw Rashmi and we saw my tool for the first time. And that's whose name I was trying to remember. And I go in and I was like, oh, it was my tool. I like scrolled through, I checked, and I said to Amy, remember him? He was the Vidalkin assistant. That was amazing. And the next sentence, after I had spent all that time going and looking it up, said, from Rashmi's perspective, I miss my assistant, my Vidalkin assistant, my tool. I'm like, well, what a waste of my time. Because I forget sometimes that Kimberly and the rest of the team are very good at giving you just enough of a recap. Unless it's something very big, it is very infrequent that they will link back to a previous story. They will if you need the proper context, but everything we needed to know about my tool was mentioned very abbreviated in this story.
Yeah.
He's a kind, gentle soul. He's never hurt a soul. You know, any of those things that she said, you got that. Speaking of feelings that the story evoked, I have to say, the moment that the dwarf was being dragged out and he was pleading to have his invention given to him, I didn't know that I had missed the emotion that should have been evoked by the story that dictated confiscation coup. I didn't know that I missed that emotion until this story. And that was what, a paragraph? And it worked so well because you felt so bad for this dwarf. He's pleading and he's saying, this is all I have in my life. Please, what about my invention? I worked so hard. Tezzeret just breaks it and then says, no, that's not your invention. Everything in here belongs to me. That's devastating. For anybody that's ever made anything before, for anybody that's ever felt connected to a non-living object before, because it's theirs. They've either made it or they've improved it or they've fixed it or they just like it and it's theirs. And maybe you've lost something before that you loved and you...
worse had it taken from you.
Right. And clearly I'm talking about material things here. Death is a totally different story and that's something that's been focused on previously, but I'm talking about just an object. And like Amy said, either it's been stolen forcefully, like in front of you, or you just come to find out that it's been stolen, or it's just something that you've either misplaced or you left it somewhere and it's just gone now. That's heartbreaking. And to see it so heartlessly done, properly, but heartlessly done in terms of this man, this dwarf, is pleading with Tezzeret and with Tezzeret's, guard that are there. He's pleading with them, please, it's all I have. All the other inventors are there, and all of them are aware that there's just nothing they can do to help this guy. They just feel awful for him.
But it also shows them where they are. They're going to be in his same spot in a bit.
And yet, Rashmi says it, they stay because they're aware of the notoriety that it could bring being here.
Not for them.
And the honor that it could bring. Yeah, well, they think that that's what it is.
Yeah.
They think that that's why they're there. And by the end of the story, Rashmi is saying, now I realize who this man really is. I tried to look past the violence, the evil feelings that I got from him because it was such a great opportunity. And now I am realizing that that is not the case, that I am not going to get that. And that's when she kind of resolves herself to rebelling, no pun intended, against this man who seemingly has all the cards in his hand, right? He controls everything. He is super powerful. He has threatened to murder her. But like we've seen in movies many times, the hero will say, you're not going to kill me. You need me. And I was a little surprised because Amy was pointing out to me earlier, and you can expand on this more, that Tezzeret is not without knowledge. We learn that here, that he's not ignorant.
He knows what he's talking about, and he knows what she has to do, and that's why he was able to help her actually make it.
I don't know whether there's some kind of a rule or something that says that like Tezzeret can't work on it. I'm not really sure. I was a little confused as to why, and
maybe his hook hand thing like makes it hard.
We will. I'm assuming that it will be something that will be explained to us in the future as to why he as a planeswalker, or he as Tezzeret, or he as an agent of Nicol Bolas, or whatever it is, that he cannot manipulate this invention. But it was odd to me that she told him exactly what was wrong with the machine, and so
but
he
she
says,
wasn't able to see the solution, yet he basically instantly was.
right. Well, I'm even talking about it towards the end when she said to him, well, it's not fixed yet. I know I told you it was done, but it's not because there was just a fuse that just blew and I have to replace the fuse. Why couldn't Tezzeret just replace the fuse? Maybe I'm not understanding
Why couldn't he realize that wasn't actually a problem?
No, I think it was. Because I think her drawing her hand out so quickly and all that ether spray. I also originally thought she was lying about that. I did. I had the same indication that I thought that she was lying about the ether fuse blowing. And maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. That was a little confusing. Because it's just as possible. Because then when she went to go fix it at the end, it said that she replaced it. So now whether she just took out a working part and replaced it with another working part just to keep up the charade, or whether it did actually blow and that's why ether was all over her, that was a little unclear in my opinion, and seemingly in Amy's as well. If you guys got it, let us know, but that was just that moment was a little bit of confusion. And honestly, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that big of a deal because it comes to the same outcome regardless. But I almost thought or hoped that Rashmi would just jump through.
Yeah, that he kept saying that.
I thought that would have been awesome. Now, I don't understand where they necessarily would have gone from there, and so I see why what happened was much better and even cool, like really cool. Not necessarily cooler, because I'm sure there were a lot of branching points that could have happened, but I thought it worked out very, very well. I loved again, there were shout outs to my tool, but we never saw him, but the whole idea of her scribbling a quick note and dropping it through the original transporter ring that was supposed to be there as a motivation tool for her, and she still ends up being able to use it by the end of the story, which I will say was very clever, because putting it there in the beginning and just saying that it's sitting on her desk as a motivation tool and it gets her upset when she sees it, that would have been fine.
Yeah.
That would have been a fine story element in and of itself. It was not like finding out that Yahenni had the ability to absorb souls to extend his life. Finding out that I said he, sorry, trying to fix that. The fact that they can do that, it means that, like, the fact that we know that they have that ability means that that ability is going to come up in the story. The fact that that transporter ring, the smaller one, was there did not mean that it had to be used in this story, because its purpose had already been shown.
Yeah.
In the fact that it was supposed to be there as a motivation, and it was really just there as a reminder of what Rashmi originally wanted in the first place, and now kind of what she was settling for in hopes of notoriety, etc. And that's a brilliant story tool. So it's a way to show you something, like show you something that's there, and then utilize it later without you even realizing that it could come into play.
Right.
Very, very clever, very well done.
Well written, yeah.
Yeah, and it's hard to do that, because if you're just blatantly like, oh, this thing is there that could help us, but I'm just telling you that in the beginning, and 7 paragraphs later, or 20 minutes later when you're reading, lo and behold, it comes into play. Well, if there was no purpose for it to be there in the beginning, it clearly had to have its purpose at the end. And so it had its purpose in the beginning and at the end, and that's why it was able to surprise you a little bit at the end. Just as a little bit of a funny thing, Amy and I were talking about the fact that a little bit, once we got towards the end of the story, Tezzeret just was evil. Just straight up a bastard and super evil and awful. But in the beginning of the story, as the patron that he was for Rashmi and the other inventors, he just seemed like Gordon Ramsay to me. He was just berating them all the time. If you're familiar with Gordon Ramsay, I guess, maybe not everybody is. But he was berating them all the time. He was attempting to do it seemingly in a way to motivate them. And Rashmi even says that if there was one positive thing that she could say is that she had never been pushed so hard in her life, and it allowed her to excel to the point that she was at. And it was just like a reality show, because she said every once in a while some desk would just be empty the next morning, and so it's just like a reality show where people would get voted off one by one. And we find out with the dwarf that it's a heck of a lot more tragic than just sorry you're going home, although some of those reality TV show stars, whether real or not, get just as emotional about it. So maybe,
and hey, they're going home and losing that paycheck, and maybe that's all they have.
Right. And some of them say that, again, whether it's real or not, because reality TV is not so real, but they say, I quit my job to be on this show, and I want to win the prize, and this is for my family, and all these other things. And so it does kind of give you the same idea. But that's totally, for like the first half of the story, what I was thinking of was, okay, so Tezzeret's Gordon Ramsay, and all these people are the chefs. And again, as we were pointing out, and as Amy correctly pointed out, Tezzeret's not just a figurehead. He also knows his stuff enough to say, okay, idiot, you're doing this stuff. How about you expand your mind a little bit, stop being so narrowly focused, and realize that this is what you can do to remedy the problem. And that's why you have expert judges like that. So just something I wanted to point out. I found that kind of interesting.
I mean, later on in the story, all I kept thinking about was the fact that he was just an abuser, and
Oh yeah. And that's a much harsher comparison, but not unwarranted. It's just
think it's harsh.
Harsh in terms of not something that people like to think about. It's not a nice thing, but it is a personality that exists, and it was there. It was definitely there. And the fact that Rashmi stayed through all of the abuse until right at the end, when there was that straw that broke the camel's back, and she finally was like, this is enough. I see who you are now. I was blind. I was so blind to it, and now I see it. And I will also say, because we are aware of these kinds of things, that explanation in and of itself is such a simplification of what an abuse victim goes through. So please don't think that I'm attempting to say, well, totally, every abuser is just going to come to their abuse victim is just going to come to that moment of realization. I'm not saying that. I'm just going along with what we were talking about, is that, there are, that comparison can absolutely be drawn. And
yeah, there was definitely that dynamic there in the story. It existed. Sorry.
No, but that's real.
Yeah,
that's a real thing in the real world, unfortunately.
It's a scary thing, and it's a thing that affects a lot of people, so I thought it was important to bring light to it, the fact that it was so prominent in this story.
It's a very good point. Very, very good point. Also, though, I have to say, from a storytelling perspective, what a great villain. Because you look at him and there is no argument. Maybe, if we hear later on what he has planned and it was somehow for somewhat of a good reason, then maybe. But honestly, as of right now, no redeeming qualities whatsoever to Tezzeret, to what he's doing, to what he is taking, the fact that he's just threatening her life, constantly calling her worthless and useless.
Threatening the livelihood of every inventor on Kaladesh.
Well, that's livelihood. I'm talking about straight up life. I mean, he threatened to kill.
The livelihood is what gets you your life.
True. Again, the dwarf said, it's all I have. It's all I have. And yet, because of their desire, no one stood up to Tezzeret except for Rashmi. And honestly, at that point, it was way too late. And that's not her fault.
Come on, guys.
But
some solidarity.
But she said, even at the end,
Yes.
and I don't blame her for this, but there was that moment at the end. And it was very quick where she had to decide between my tool and all of the multiverse. In her own mind. Of course, I said to Amy, little does she know that Tezzeret could just go there whenever he wants.
Right.
Because Rashmi didn't, until the end of this story, understand the concept of a planeswalker. She didn't get that, and she didn't understand.
She knew planes existed, and she wanted to be able to prove planes existed, but she couldn't.
She knew that planes existed, but she couldn't vocalize it. Because at the end, she talks about that. She's like, I always knew that they were out there. But that doesn't mean that she could hypothesize that, if we want to use scientific terms. She wouldn't have been able to say, there's a multiverse out there, and I'm going to find it.
Here's why I say that.
Right. For all she knew was she was making a transporter ring. Now, again, I am super curious. I'm almost certain I've said this before, but I am super curious as to where we are going, what Tezzeret has planned. If you have not seen the story spotlight cards that have been spoiled for Aether Revolt, I'm not going to talk about them here because I don't want to spoil them for all of you, but the fifth and final one that references to something later in the future is fascinating to me. It makes me very interested to see where this story goes, and I'm hoping that we will get there. I'm sure that it will be interesting getting us there.
Yes.
I love that Liliana was at the end of the story. I don't necessarily fully love that her comment, we see her for just a quick moment, and it's her with Rashmi, and then they're getting out in a warehouse among all the other rebels, and Liliana is saying, I was told I was going to get a crack at Tezzeret, which means she doesn't stay behind to fight Tezzeret. She goes back with all of them.
Which is a good thing. I mean, because then we start to learn where her allegiances really lie. I mean, what are her motivations? For a long time, we would have sworn it was doing anything and everything she can to stop Tezzeret. And in reality, I think we're starting to learn her connection to the Gatewatch, how much she really cares about these other people enough to forego that, at least for the time being.
Or, in contrast to that, definitely a possibility. In contrast to that, we are learning how far Liliana is willing to go to keep up the farce that she cares about these people, to bend them to her side so that when she is ready to enact her plan, as she has stated previously in the stories, it'll be more of a shock. And honestly, if storytelling is done the way the storytelling should be done, my assumption is there will come that moment where she will toy between those two things.
Right.
She will toy between whether she cares more about the
Gatewatch. She
Gatewatch.
was on purpose saying that she was going to do one thing, and she was trying to deceive them and trying to force them to do what she wanted, blah, blah, blah. And then just like every other movie or story or whatever,
In the end, she realizes
she
that
turns good, and she realized that she loves these people too much to break their hearts, and blah, blah, blah.
or they swerve you, she really does become evil like that, and then the rest of the Gatewatch has to fight her, which is also just as interesting.
It's more interesting. Yeah.
Oh man. But
I think it would be interesting to see how Liliana acts versus what it is she's really feeling, and how much of that we get to see and know in the time, at the time, each new time. I think that'll, seeing that transition will be cool.
yeah, definitely. We'll see where it goes. As always, we'll see where it goes.
Yeah.
This was another fantastic job done. 1 by Kimberly Kreines, 2 by the Magic Story team in general. My non-existent hat is once again off to you guys. It was just so amazing. This story was great. Like I said, so much meat to it. If you still didn't listen to us and you watched this whole review without reading the story, trust me.
Now you know how much you want to read it.
Trust me, it's definitely worth your time because there's a lot that we didn't delve into.
So much.
There's so much more because it would take hours. I mean, it was very, very well done, and there are so many other. This is the kind of story that we can look back to it later and say, oh, okay, so Tezzeret was so concerned because of this, or Rashmi really didn't have any idea what she was getting into because Tezzeret's plans were leading to this.
Right.
Since we don't know what those are yet, and again, you get a slight clue if you look at the 5th story spotlight. Again, I don't want to spoil it because I don't want to be that guy. I want everybody to enjoy their spoiler season and, get into the holiday spirit of enjoying those little gifts from Wizards like I've been doing, like we've been doing. So I encourage you to go out there and look for those story spotlight cards for Aether Revolt. Again, I'm not going to spoil them. It does give you a little bit of a clue into Tezzeret's plan, but I want to see how he implements it, why he's implementing it. I want to see I believe the 2nd story spotlight card involves Tezzeret as well, which means that hopefully that one's coming soon, and I want to see that because that one seems to be action-packed, or will seem to be action-packed, so I'm looking forward to that as well. Let us know what you're looking forward to down in the comments below.
Please.
Whether it's more JaAR, maybe, hopefully, whether it's more of these stories, what you think, what you thought of this video, what you thought of Breakthrough as a story. Let us know. You can check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Those links are down in the description box below. You can subscribe to find out when more of these videos come out. When Aether Revolt comes out, we'll be opening tons of product as we've always done.
Yes.
You can definitely go check out more openings that we've done on the channel. The most recent opening that we did was we did a Kaladesh gift box, and that you can find up here. I could cover my face or I could just do this. Either way. Perfect frame placement. But yeah.
Because it highlights me.
That's fair. So yeah, guys, this has been another episode of JaAR. I've been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
We had tons of fun today showing off our
#Vorthos Pride.
We're here on the Geek for All YouTube channel. And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all next time. Thanks, everybody.